Hello, welcome back to the Shoogly Shed. I'm Ewan. This episode is going to be covering build costs. So, perhaps not that interesting to a lot of folk, but maybe interesting to others. This is a subject that I think a lot of builders don't really talk about or don't cover in much detail. Gorilla Biker did a really good breakdown of his Gixxer build, and I found that quite refreshing to hear and actually very interesting to learn a little bit about what a builder spends when they're, like in his case, restoring a bike, or in my case, completely starting from scratch. Motorbikes can be a total money pit, and it's really easy to let the bank balance run away with you, and then before you know it, you've spent way more than perhaps you meant to, and certainly way more than the bike is ever going to be worth. So you need to, before you begin, make a decision in your own head what your end goal is here. Are you looking to try and turn a profit by making this bike to sell it, or are you just building it for building its sake? You know, like I was with this. I knew that a crappy 90s twin was never going to be worth a lot of money, so pouring a lot of money into it had to be about learning experiences for me and just the full enjoyment of the build, because I'm never going to see this money back, frankly. That said, I still think I got a pretty good deal out of it, and I have learnt so much on this build, and I really can't put a price on that. But aside from that, even just materials and that sort of thing, and the parts and the tools I've had to buy for this build, I'm still pretty sure that I got a good deal, I think. One thing I did as I built this bike was keep a really detailed account of what I was buying and what it was for. That basically allowed me to keep an eye on, one, how much I was spending, and two, a rough gauge of how much in total it was going to cost in the end. I have done this build over the past like 6 or 7 months, so I've managed to space the money out a little bit so it doesn't feel quite as painful to spend that amount of money perhaps in a big chunk if you went and bought a bike from a dealer or second hand. New merch. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into this. As you know, I got the parts for the bike from a friend of mine who I've actually bought GS500 parts from before. He's had a few of them, and he basically said to me, look, I have more or less an entire bike in parts here, would you like them? I'd already bought 2 engines from him. I bought the engines just as a learning experience. If you remember back to the first few episodes on this channel, I just bought them because I wanted to learn how to build engines, and that's essentially it. Nothing more complicated than that. And I think I got that. I got my money's worth there. I paid £80 for the engine, for the 2 engines, sorry, and that was just to buy them first of all, and then I decided to build the entire bike. So I basically, in total, buying the bike and the engines, the parts, the frame, and the parts that I managed to get from my friend cost me £230. So it's 80 for the engines and 150 for the other parts, which in anyone's book is worth a punt. I didn't know if this bike would come together the way I wanted it to, so spending a lot of money on it probably wasn't what I wanted to do, but for a couple of £100 to £230, worth a punt, right? Rebuilding the engines was a huge chunk of cash. That basically cost like probably a good third, maybe a quarter of the entire build costs. Rebuilding an engine is really expensive, and I would urge anyone out there to seriously consider buying a replacement engine instead of rebuilding if the engine doesn't hold any particular, not monetary but sentimental value. Like, I totally understand rebuilding an engine that really means a lot to you. Perhaps it's from a bike that belongs to, I don't know, a beloved grandparent or something. But if it's just a 90s twin that you can get a new, or you can get a second-hand engine on eBay for £100, then don't bother, because I spent about that on piston rings. Anyway, to break the engine build down a little bit, gasket set cost me £47. So that's full gasket set with all the paper gaskets and O-rings and copper washers and that sort of thing. Engine paint, I opted for Simonez engine enamel and tough paint to spray the casings and the cylinder head and the cylinders. So that cost me 50 quid. Shock, this was something I ordered early on, was an SV650 shock for the bike. I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but that cost me 50 bucks on eBay. The reason I bought it so early on in the build is because I knew that that's the upgrade I wanted to do. I had a quick look on eBay and I found one for a really good price, and I know they can sometimes go for a little bit more, so I bought that straight away. Engine seals. Engine seals, the things like the output shaft seals, the input shaft seals, the gear changing seals, and a few other seals as well. I had to buy them from motorcyclespareparts.eu. They cost me £37. Quite a lot of money for some bits of rubber, but hey ho. Stainless bolt kit. I bought a stainless bolt kit for the casings for all the bolts to replace the old bolts, just to give it that extra shine. That cost me £20. The output shaft bearing for the gearbox cost me £27, and the spacer to go on the end of that output shaft cost me £26. Big end bearing that I had to replace cost me £19 for the two halves of the shell bearing. I got the petrol tank for £20. As you know, it was in pretty bad condition, so that was a bargain anyway. Ignition barrel, that cost me £18. The set that I got from my friend didn't have any keys, and I managed to pick up an ignition barrel set and lock set for the petrol tank for £18, so that was worth doing to have some matching keys. O-rings for the engine. I had to buy O-rings to go on top of the cylinder, between the cylinder and the cylinder head. They cost me £25 for tiny little rubber O-rings. They're like little compression O-rings. Honestly, crazy amount of money, but you kind of had to replace them when you're putting the cylinder head onto the cylinder, so stuck between a rock and a hard place there. Piston rings also cost me £90. Again, if you're into an engine, you might as well replace the piston rings, especially if you're honing the cylinders. So again, I was kind of at the mercy of the price there. £90 for piston rings. £12 to replace one of the casing bolts, one of the ones that holds the two halves of the crankcase together. Again, at the mercy of Suzuki there. Copper washers for the top of the cylinder head and the cylinder head stud bolts. They cost me £10 to get the ones, the OEM ones from Suzuki. I probably could have gone to a building merchants and got cheaper copper ones. I don't know why I spent that much. Anyway, I bought a sump plug and oil filter together. The sump plug is a magnetic one, so it has a wee magnet glued to the end of the plug. So when you screw it in, if there's any small pieces of metal, magnetic metal, it should stick to it. On each oil change you can give it a wee clean, so hopefully it keeps your engine a little bit cleaner. And of course, the new oil filter, that cost me £12. A sheet of steel that I purchased for various little brackets, and also made the battery box out of it and my original seat pan before I made a mistake with that. If you haven't seen it, watch the episode. Valve shims, spent £34 on different size valve shims for the cylinder head. That was a bit of a sore one to take, but because it's not adjustable rockers, you've actually got the valve buckets with the shims. You had to buy the correct size ones to get your valve spacing right. Fork seals cost me £10. Second petrol tank. If you remember, I bought that petrol tank that wasn't in very good condition, and I got a lock set with it as well. And then when I was looking to buy an exhaust, the guy I bought the exhaust from also had a better condition petrol tank from, and that's the one I ended up doing all the work on. So 2 petrol tanks, but that tank and OEM exhaust cost me £65. Obviously second hand, and the exhaust was pretty pitted and rusted and needed a lot of work and spray painting and things, but for a petrol tank and an exhaust set, £65, not a bad deal. Forks. If you remember, I had to go and buy forks because the ones I got from my friend were totally just unserviceable. They in a bent stanchion, they had a seized top cap in one of them. They were not worth putting any kind of money into, so I ended up the same person I got the tank and the exhausts from sold me a set of forks for £40. Again, they needed refurbing, but for £40, much better than the other ones I originally had. Spent £5 on a set of fork gaiters. Headstock bearings cost me £14, and wheel bearings cost me £20. Some random stainless bolts that I bought for something cost me £6. More bolts cost me £23. I just have bolts sort of sporadically on this list, and I think it's just if and when I bought different size stainless bolts, if they were, you know, particular sizes or fine pitch and that kind of thing, I just put them into this list. So I've got bolts £6, bolts £23. Who knows? Foot pegs cost me £15. Those are the GSXR ones that I modified to fit the GS500. Torque arm, I got a Bandit torque arm to go on this to give me a little bit extra tyre clearance at the back. That cost me £8. I had to buy a gear shifter that cost me £10. I got a sprocket kit and chain for £20 from a friend who had bought them for his bike and literally fitted it, and then I think the bike maybe did about 10 miles before it got broken for parts, so they were effectively brand new, and for £20 I thought, hey ho, that's a good deal. I had to buy a Speedo drive for £10. I had to get some nuts for £4, so that was an axle nut. I had to get a fine pitch M16 axle nut. You know, that cost me £4. I got a castle nut for the torque arm, cost me £3. Now into a big ticket item, which was powder coating the frame and wheels. That was £180. Handlebars cost me £20. I had to buy a new rear disc, that cost me £25. I had to buy a sprocket retainer for that front sprocket, that cost me £4. Now probably the biggest ticket item of the entire list were the tyres, the Continental TKC 80s. They cost me £208 from Tyre Tech Trading. Really good guys to deal with if you're in the market for tyres like that or other motorbike tyres. Definitely give them a shout. Next day service was unbelievable. I think I ordered them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and they were there the next lunchtime, so I don't know how that worked, but fantastic service, like I say. £208. Battery cost me £45. That was the Motobat upgrade. I bought a set of handlebar switches. It cost me £11 that I ended up not even using, but I've got them on the list anyway. Throttle, I bought a throttle body, the aluminium throttle body, to replace the original one for £9. I bought a new axle nut for the front, which was a fine pitch M14 or 12, I can't remember. That cost me £3. Engine bolts, new bolts for mounting the engine, cost me £17, and the spacers for the bottom cost me £13. A random circlip I have in here cost me £4. That seems like a lot for a circlip, but I appear to have paid it. I've got in another axle nut. That's 3 by my count. Cost me £5 anyway. I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe I've entered it twice, but I'm adding it in. It's only a £5. The levers are aftermarket CB400 levers, I think. They cost me £15.50. Just pretty basic cast aluminium levers, and they are really good. They're nice and shiny, and they look the part, and they function. So for £15.50, I'm not going to complain. I bought a new starter solenoid. That cost me £13. It was a little bit of an upgrade from the OEM one. I bought an LED flasher relay for £5. Choke plunger cost me £5. I bought that to keep things off the handlebars. There's usually a choke lever on the handlebars, but this choke plunger I've mounted into the airbox, just inside of the airbox, so you can operate the choke just by reaching under. Keeps it nice and clean up at the front. Indicators. I bought these tiny little indicators for £9. They are like Chinese, but they're E-marked, so they're road legal, and they're actually surprisingly bright. The build quality seems reasonable. There's not a lot to them, they're just sort of plastic casings, but I was looking for really small indicators and these fitted the bill perfectly, and I thought for £9 let's have a look and see. And when they arrived, I was blown away with the quality. They're really bright, and I've just bought a set for the XS250 as well. That's how much I like them. Again, for £9, worth a punt. Brand new clutch cable cost me £6. Bought spark plug caps for £6.50. Excuse my neighbour using his nail gun. I don't live in the hood or anything, it's just a nail gun. The exhaust end can, that Schnell exhaust can that I got from XL Moto, that cost me £45. That was a bargain. That was down from like 115 or something, so really pleased with that one. I had to buy a rubber mudguard grommet to hold the Speedo cable to the front mudguard. That cost me £4. For the seat, I had to buy thread that cost me £9. and I also bought some backing material for £5, and then the waterproof suede I got from Struan from Remotorcycled for free. So thank you very much again, Struan. That was a real lifesaver, and it is really nice material and really easy to work with, and the seat came out really nicely. I hope you agree. I had to buy a CDI for the engine. That was a bit annoying. That was £40. The CDI was missing from the electrical parts that I got from my friend, and he couldn't find it anywhere. He wasn't even sure what happened to it. It was a bit frustrating because it was a fairly expensive thing to have to buy for such a small unit size. But ignition timing, you need a CDI for it, so that cost me £40 on eBay just from my breakers. Brake rebuild kits cost me £35. That was just for the seals and the stainless bleed nipples and the pins that hold the pads in. So they were £35. I bought a mile per hour little speedo gauge for £65. It was really hard to get a mile per hour one. Most of the ones you find online are kilometres per hour, but I'm in the UK and we have miles per hour. So I had to specifically try and find one that was miles per hour, and I did eventually on eBay. It also had the little sort of warning lights in it as well, built into the speedo itself. So again, that kept the front nice and clean. Air filter cost me £12. A big bundle of different coloured electrical cable for wiring cost me £20. A new throttle cable cost me £8. Brake pads cost me £20. The little momentary start button that I mounted into the front brake lever cost me £10. The 2K lacquer I bought cost me £22, and the paint and primer cost me £40, plus £10 for a tub of filler. The fuel hose cost me £7. The hose clamps were £15, because a big box of assorted ones, they'll do me for a while anyway. A big box of electrical connectors for the wiring cost me £10. Brake hoses cost me £17, brand new brake hoses. £5 on a stand spring for the side stand, because that went walkies. I spent £6 on some car edging trim that I'm going to put around the bottom of the tank. Little CNC brake reservoir for the rear master cylinder cost me £5. I spent £18 on a rear light that is yet to arrive. Well, hopefully that arrives soon and I can get the bike finished. Speedo cable, £7. Caliper seals cost me £6. The rebuild kit that I bought for the front came with 30mm seals, whereas for some reason it was the wrong size and I needed 27mm, so I had to go buy them separately. They cost me £6. I had to buy a battery earth cable to earth the battery to the engine. I didn't have anything of that gauge, it's a really thick cable, so I had to go and buy that. That cost me £5. Various electrical sundries, so things like heat shrink and a few extra connectors and some solder connections and things like that, and some sleeving, cable ties, some sticky pad, cable tie holder things. They cost me £50. Again, I didn't use them all on this one build, so they'll last me a wee while, but it's worth putting into this entire build cost. I bought a diode kit for £9 on eBay, which essentially stops a hazarding issue with the LEDs. If you have a bike with a singular indicator light on the dash, the way it's wired will allow current to leak, and when you put your LED indicators in, you'll get like hazarding, both lights going at once, so you need to put in a wee diode in the electrics to stop that happening. You can go to an electric shop and buy a diode and solder it all together and do it yourself for a few quid, but there's someone on eBay that sells a kit that's basically plug and play for £9, so that's what I did. I'd done it to a few other bikes, did it on the XS. It's a necessary and quite cheap upgrade, so yeah, recommended. The little orange Suzuki decals for the tank cost me £3. Stainless banjo bolts for the brakes cost me £10. Stainless caliper bolts, I had to buy fine pitch M10 45mm bolts for the brake caliper, and they cost me £6. To get my speedo mount and the chain guard that I manufactured powder coated cost me £15, and a tub of touch-up paint for the orange frame cost me £7. Sandpaper for prepping the tank cost me £6. A new printed aluminium license plate cost me £7, and a little LED license plate light to mount under the mudguard to illuminate the license plate cost me £5. And that, as they say, is that. The total. £2,172. So that's British pounds. I think that's a pretty reasonable amount of money to spend on a complete custom bike build. I know a lot of other builders can run into the tens of thousands, so keeping it, I was trying to keep it under £2,000, but 2,172, under 2,200. I'm pretty pleased with that, to be honest, and I can't wait to show you the final bike. I've got a couple of wee things just to finish up before I do a video revealing what it looks like now. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. But to be honest, I have learnt so much on this build. It is without doubt the most amount of effort and work and quality I've put into a bike build. And do you know what? There's still bits that I'm not 100% happy with, or I think I could do better. And I think that's actually annoyingly quite a good thing to feel when you finish a project. If you finish a project and think you couldn't do it any better, then you might as well just hang up your hat and not do anything ever again. I always feel like I can improve, and I like that because it means that I have motivation to go out and produce something else. And at the end of the day, when you look back on all your projects, if you think that the first project you ever made was your best one, then you're perhaps not learning lessons. I definitely improve every time I do any kind of work to my bikes, and that is one of the most satisfying and fulfilling parts about motorbike building in general. One thing I should point out is I haven't included the price for tools. I had to buy a few specialist tools for this build. Not a lot. I tried to get away with the sort of hints and tips that the Haynes manual give you, things to try and avoid, spending money on servicing tools. But there are a few things like valve spring compressor tool. I can't think of an easy way to replace your valve springs or just take your valves out of a cylinder head for grinding without a valve spring compressor tool, so I had to buy that. I had to buy a blind bearing puller for various applications. I had to buy some really big sockets for things like the main clutch nut in the engine. I didn't have a socket big enough for that, so I had to buy a socket kit. I had to buy piston ring pliers, things like that. Especially when you're working with an engine rebuild, you're talking about fine engineering that most servicing folk, people working in their sheds and garages, wouldn't own that equipment because they would never open an engine up to that extent. So I think that those things are an investment, and I'm not going to include them in this build cost because I'll get use out of them in the future. I know I will. So I don't think it's fair to lump the cost of those tools into this build. Even if I did, it wasn't a heck of a lot of money, and like I say, getting use out of them means that they're an investment. I would be interested to hear what you think, and obviously we'll be interested to hear what you think about when you see the build completed, but I'm interested to hear perhaps what your perceptions were of a build like this and how much it might cost you to do. I was trying with this build to spend... I'm always trying to spend as little money as possible, but also not skimp on some of the things that actually make a build quality just that little bit extra. Things like powder coating. I think it is really worth getting as many parts powder coated as possible, especially hard wearing parts like your frame and wheels, purely because the finish you get is really good and it is so hard wearing, and it makes subpar welding passable. It smooths everything out a little bit. Now obviously this build could have cost a heck of a lot more if I'd had to buy a donor bike that cost me a lot more than the £230 I spent on this collection of parts. So there are pros and cons of buying a bike in boxes or buying a running bike. In future, I'm probably going to try and buy bikes with a good running engine as a base point. I'd be happy to do things like a top end rebuild and stuff, but there are very few bikes that I would invest the time, effort and money into rebuilding an engine from the ground up, like going into the crankcases and things like that, purely because the money involved on the parts and the replaceables and the wearables, it piles on you really quickly, and then eventually you've spent way more than the engine is ever going to be worth. So I would recommend, and I will do this in the future, probably buying a running bike that you know has a decent motor in it, or at least if the motor has any issues, they're very easy fixable issues. You know, things like valve grinding and top end rebuilds and things like that, because those are relatively inexpensive to get a lot extra mileage out of an engine. But buying, like I did, buying 2 engines that I'd never seen them run, and I knew already there were issues with them, I was asking for trouble, really. I was asking to spend a lot of money there. So yeah, that's my recommendation, is buy a runner to start off with. I also gave myself a lot of extra work with things like the welding I wanted to do to the frame, the trellis work, and also because I bought a bike in boxes, I didn't know that all the parts were there, and a few fairly expensive parts were also missing. Things like the petrol tank and the exhausts and stuff, and the CDI and a few other electrical components. These things started to add to the build cost and made the sort of value for money aspect of buying a bike in boxes less attractive to me, because unless you have an itinerary of what you're getting, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever split the bike and what parts they hang on to. So at the end of the day, you can spend a lot of money just chasing parts that you didn't realise you needed at the start and perhaps didn't even budget for. So that's another reason for buying a bike in whole. At least you know all the parts are there. Sure, some parts may need completely refurbed or in fact replaced, but you at least know that 95% of the bike is going to be usable. Right, I'm going to knock this one on the head because I know it's perhaps not a very interesting episode for a lot of folk, but like I said at the beginning, I think it's important for builders to be honest about the money they spend on these sorts of things, because especially online and Instagram and that kind of thing, you can get this sort of skewed idea on how much these things cost and the infinite pots of money that some people appear to have. And some builds coming out of places look top quality, but would you ever be able to see that money back selling that bike? Probably not. So I think it is a responsible thing to do, is to be open and frank and honest about the amount of money that something like motorbike building costs you, and just making sure that you do it for the right reasons. I did it for me. I did it because I wanted to learn. I did it because I want a bike out of it. I'm not doing it to sell it or anything. It's not a business for me. So there's a lot of things that I could spend money on because I knew there was an investment in myself and not an investment in a business, and that is a big advantage for someone like me. I can spend a little bit more or a little bit less on different parts to suit me, rather than trying to fit around a client budget, or even just to try and make a business turn over a profit. In the next episode, I hope to finally show you the finished GS500 build. I haven't named this build, and I know that that's a bit of a trend amongst bike builders, is to give their builds a name. It's not something I've ever done. I've never named any of my bikes other than whatever the model the bike is and the style I went for, like the XS250 Street Scrambler, but it's not got a name. And this build doesn't have a name either. If you think I should name it, let me know. If you have a name for it, let me know. I know some musings about the fourth rail bridge have been uttered, which I think is a compliment, because it isn't the fourth rail bridge is a massive achievement of Scottish engineering. So if you can draw me a parallel between my bike and that, then great. Thank you very much. Anyway, yeah, hit me up in the comments if you've got a suggestion for a name. But like I said earlier, when I get this rear light and I get the tank polished up and mounted, the bike should be finished and I can show you it. And I also plan to do a proper time-lapse overview build video that just kind of shows a lot of the processes from this whole build series in one condensed video, and from start to finish basically. So if you're interested in that, let me know and I'll put that together. But until the next time, as usual, give me a like, leave me a comment, and please do subscribe to the Shoogly Shed channel, and I will see you next time. Take care, bye bye. Before I forget, I have set up some merch. People have been asking me for t-shirts and things like that. If you go to the link in my channel, on my channel's homepage, there's a Redbubble link. It's also in the bio for my Instagram page. You can pick up t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and everything in between. So if you are interested and you want to give me a wee bit of support, then please do feel free to go on there and pick yourself something up.